It's my very great pleasure to introduce Beth A. Berkowitz, our Elga K. Stulman visiting scholar for this academic year. Professor Berkowitz holds the Ingeborg Rennert Chair in Jewish Studies and is professor of religion at Barnard College, where she has taught since 2012. She's the author of Execution and Invention, Death Penalty Discourse in Early Rabbinic and Christian Cultures, published by Oxford University Press in 2006, which was awarded the Salo Baron Prize for Outstanding First Book in Jewish Studies in 2007. She's also the author of Defining Jewish Difference from Antiquity to the Present, published by Cambridge University Press in 2012, and most recently, of Animals and Animality in the Babylonian Talmud, published by Cambridge University Press in 2018. In addition, she is the author of numerous articles and essays and book reviews. At present, Professor Berkowitz is at work on a new book provisionally entitled What Animals Teach Us About Families, a study of 4 biblical laws and their afterlives, a project not unrelated to the presentations she will be making this week at Brown. The title of her presentation tonight is Birds as Architects, Dads, and Hats, the Mother Bird Mitzvah in the Mishnah and Talmud. Please join me in welcoming Beth Berkowitz to Brown.
I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to share work with you. I really want to thank Professor Hullin for being such a wonderful host and introducer. And I want to thank Susan Rottenberg for her truly incredible administrative support. And I also want to thank Julian Borges for his excellent media support. So you really have a great team here at Brown. Okay, so there's a video on YouTube that did not exactly go viral. The last time I checked, it had 53 views, and you'll see why in a minute. It's called Yoni's Mom Does Shiluach Hakan. The video shows a woman, presumably the mother of someone named Yoni, struggling to scare a pigeon off her porch. Yoni's mom is the one who looks scared, though, as she stamps her feet and claps in the pigeon's direction. Does she succeed in getting the pigeon off her porch? Let's watch the video.
He's gonna go on my face. No, he won't. Did he go into our face? No. He walks right across.
No, but it didn't like the way you walked.
No, because you're scaring him. You don't want to scare him.
I myself near where the bird.
Okay. He doesn't.
It doesn't fear me.
No,
enough.
walk.
Smack your foot.
Walk to.
I don't want to.
Shall I walk it?
No, how'd you do this? Go.
It'll go.
Shoot.
It's about to go.
Shoot. Oh my god. Please go. Oh my god. I'm really scared.
It's going. It goes go a little bit.
I feel claustrophobic.
If you walk
Just
closer to it, it'll move.
Closer to
Where is
it.
it gonna go in my face?
No, of
Down
course not.
there.
You didn't see the way it went.
Can you help me out?
I hope it doesn't go in your face.
It walked towards you.
I'm kidding, I'm kidding.
Oh my god. Just taking me there. Please just leave. People downstairs are like, what is happening? Please just go over. Why is it taking so long? Okay, this thing has no fear.
Okay, I've been here, done.
Has no fear, it has no fear.
Really amazing.
Where is it?
Okay, now you walk there and he'll go right there.
Oh,
See?
went out. It went out.
Okay.
Yoni's mom is performing the commandment known as shiluach hakan, literally sending of the nest. The mitzvah's origin is in Deuteronomy. If you happen upon a bird's nest along the road, in any tree or on the ground with chicks or eggs, and the mother is sitting over the chicks or on the eggs, do not take the mother with her children. Send off the mother and take the children for yourself, in order that you may fare well and have a long life. In other words, one must first shoo away the mother bird before taking her chicks or eggs from the nest. This command is found within a miscellany of criminal, civil, and family laws. The bird commandment's concern with respect for parents evokes the law of the insubordinate son found in the preceding chapter of Deuteronomy. This commandment is even more explicitly connected to the Decalogue's honor thy father and mother, found in Deuteronomy 5:16, which offers the same promise of prosperity and long life that this command does. It is that reward that Yoni's mom is seeking, as are the many other people performing this commandment who are featured on YouTube. It's mostly ultra-Orthodox rabbis in the company of their followers. The mitzvah has generated something of a cottage industry with charges of up to $500 or $600 for a home pickup and drive to a nesting spot. It's an awkward, even comical mitzvah. People shake sticks and screwdrivers at pigeons who are nesting in the crevices of our urban landscapes. They climb rickety ladders to reach nests whose contents may be a surprise. In one video, a rabbi who has climbed a ladder to take a nest from the upper reaches of a building exclaims with surprise when he finds a fully hatched chick there. You can see stills from that video here. One of the boys to whom the rabbi shows the chick looks quite alarmed as the rabbi turns to the assembled boys and blesses each one. The fearful boy shouts, "You're going to kill her," meaning the bird. So the path from Deuteronomy to Yoni's mom's porch is plotted through a passage in the Babylonian Talmud, the canonical late ancient compilation of Jewish law and lore. The sages taught, if you happen upon a bird's nest, what teaching does the verse convey? Since it is stated, send off the mother and take the children for yourself, is it possible that one should search in the mountains and hills in order to find a nest? The verse states, if you happen upon it, when it befalls you. This reading of the Deuteronomy verse poses a rhetorical question. Should one seek out a bird's nest in order to perform the mitzvah? Of course not, answers the Midrash. One performs the mitzvah only should it become relevant. In the same way that one returns one's neighbor's lost ox, only if the ox gets lost, which is what Deuteronomy 22:1 requires, a nearby verse. The Midrash's intentionally implausible reading of the verse is through a fluke taken by modern audiences to be the Talmud's and the biblical verse's intended meaning. This counterintuitive reading of Deuteronomy, that one should go out of one's way to find a bird's nest to fulfill the mitzvah, was inspired by the Jewish mystical work of the Zohar, which envisions the suffering of the mother bird catching the notice of the divine Shekhinah, who fills with compassion and decides to redeem Israel. By the 18th century, it had evidently become popular to seek out opportunities to perform the mitzvah, though most rabbinic decisors then until today objected to the practice. So my purpose in this talk is not to quote Shakespeare, is neither to bury the practice nor to praise it, but to use it as an opportunity to rethink the treatment of animal kinship by rabbinic tradition. There are 3 other commandments in the Torah, aside from that of the mother bird, that center on animal family bonds. Do not cook a kid in his mother's milk. leave a baby animal with the mother for the first week of life, and do not slaughter an animal parent and child on the same day. There's a paradox in these laws, which is their peculiar combination of compassion and cruelty. What happens when the mother bird returns to her nest to discover that her chicks have vanished? Is slaughtering an animal parent and child on different days any more compassionate than doing so on the same day? Does cooking a kid in oil or water make the end of the young goat's life any less untimely than when he is cooked in the milk? Maimonides quipped that had God wanted us to show compassion for animals, God would not have permitted us to slaughter them. So here is the plan for my talk. After discussing dominant perspectives on the mother bird mitzvah that are associated not just with good luck, but also with compassion, I proceed to my main aim, which is to showcase rabbinic texts from the Mishnah and Babylonian Talmud tractate Hullin that have been underrepresented, in my view. Texts that feature neither good luck nor compassion nor anything human at all. The rabbinic texts that I discuss from Hullin chapter 12 evince interest in birds as ingenious builders, as fathers and not just mothers, as caretakers and as altruists, as rebel spirits who resist captivity even unto death, and finally in birds as co-inhabitants of the earth, whose lives are parallel to as well as enmeshed with our own. So I offer here a bird-centric approach to this commandment, an effort to read it in a spirit of anti-anthropocentrism. To do this, I will draw upon animal studies scholar Matthew Calarco's notion of indistinction, to which I will turn in my conclusion. So the greatest power of the mother bird mitzvah, according to Jewish interpretive traditions, is actually not to give someone a good life, as Yoni's mom and others today are seeking, but rather to teach a person how to live a good life. Religious studies scholar Aaron Gross has called this mitzvah one of the rachamim traditions, designed to cultivate rachamim, or compassion, from the Hebrew word for womb, rechem. Embedded in the word is the notion that motherly care is the source and model for empathy. Gross sees the rachamim traditions as lacing together, and I quote him, concerns about animal death and birth, a mandate not to cause animals to suffer, respect for animal bonding with mothers, a valorization of human and divine rachamim, and the meaning of being a Jew. So Maimonides explains how this works. For in these cases, animals feel very grave pain. There being no difference regarding this pain between man and other animals. For the love and the tenderness of a mother for her child is not consequent upon reason, but upon the activity of the imaginative faculty, which is found in most animals, just as it is found in man. This is also the reason for the commandment to let the mother go from the nest. For in general, the eggs over which the bird has sat and the young that need their mother are not fit to be eaten. If then the mother is let go and escapes of her own accord, she will not be pained by seeing that the young are taken away. In most cases, this will lead to people leaving everything alone, for what may be taken is in most cases not fit to be eaten. If the law takes into consideration these pains of the soul in the case of beasts and birds, what will be the case with regard to the individuals of the human species as a whole? So first, Maimonides claims that motherly love is common to humans and to animals. He then proposes that if the mother does not see the removal of her young, she won't suffer. Next, Maimonides speculates that most of the time, people won't end up taking the chicks anyway, since they don't make for good food. In the last step, Maimonides invokes the long-standing approach to ethical behavior towards animals, which is that it's not just good for animals, it's good for people. Similar to the popular notion that future serial killers and school shooters can be identified early on by their torture of animals, this line of thought presumes that animals are sort of the training ground for people who are implicitly the fully deserving recipients of compassion. So this paragraph from the guide lays out the main tracks within the compassion approach to this commandment, an approach whose foundations were laid by the 1st century CE Jewish philosopher Philo. Where that approach does not find much expression, surprisingly enough, is in classical rabbinic literature. Mishnah Brachot 5:3, in fact, forbids a person from associating this commandment with divine compassion. One who says, "May your mercy reach the nest of a bird," they silence him. In the explanation of this Mishnah found in the Palestinian Talmud, this prayer formula insults God's compassion by implying that God exercises it only towards the mother bird and not towards others who are deserving. In the Babylonian Talmud, one rabbi suggests that the ascription of the mother bird commandment to God's mercy might pit God's creatures against each other, sort of like siblings competing for their parents' love. Another rabbi just proposes a moratorium on guessing at God's reasoning altogether. But a story in the Babylonian Talmud in Brachot 33b that features a prayer leader invoking God's compassion for the mother bird and then being praised by another rabbi for doing so suggests that the compassion rationale did in fact take root in rabbinic sources. So the two approaches, one advocating the rationale of compassion, the other rejecting it, both actually find expression in Maimonides' writing, curiously enough, since in his commentary on the Mishnah and in his Mishnah Torah, Maimonides rejects the compassion rationale, even though, as we just saw before, in his guide, he promotes that rationale. So that contradiction within Maimonides has preoccupied many an interpreter. But what I want to point out is that there's actually a shared conceptual framework to both approaches, which is an overarching anthropocentrism. Whether the mother bird confers good luck or trains people to be virtuous or how to think about God, she is teaching them some lesson, how to be, how to act, how to believe. In the subsequent discussion, I turn to rabbinic treatments of the mother bird mitzvah that offer an alternative pedagogy, one that teaches people not how to think about themselves, each other, or God, but how to think in new ways about birds. So nests are having a renaissance. In a trend known as biomimicry, architects look to nature for inspiration. Any structure we make is a nest, says Janine Benyus, a biologist who studies biomimicry. Some architects design buildings that actually look like birds' nests, such as South African designer Porky Heffer's human tree nests, or New York architect Michael Perry's affordable apartments that are attached to the side of a building, or the gargantuan Beijing National Stadium, which locals dubbed the bird's nest. Birds actually spend relatively little time in their nests. The nests are essentially containers for eggs and chicks, and they're not needed outside of breeding season. But birds' nests are ingenious in design, diverse in size and location, eclectic in materials, and extraordinarily adapted to their environments. So the architectural talent of birds does not go unnoticed in rabbinic texts. The Tosefta is a parallel work to the Mishnah, both of which are rabbinic law collections from 2nd and 3rd century CE Roman Palestine. Tosefta Hullin 1013 speaks of multiple locations in which birds build nests. One who finds a nest in pits, ditches, or caves, it is permitted with respect to theft, but they are liable for sending. The concern in this legislation is the applicability of the mother bird mitzvah to nests found not specifically, quote unquote, along the road in any tree or on the ground, which is the phrasing of the Deuteronomy commandment. So according to Peter Goodfellow's survey of nest construction, the sites mentioned in the Tosefta, pits, ditches, caves, are in fact nesting sites selected by many bird species. Shore nesting plovers and the common eider dig shallow scrape nests out of the ground in open habitats. Eastern meadowlarks conceal their dome nests in depressions in the ground. Bee eaters, great hornbills, and burrowing owls dig or find holes and tunnels in which to build their nests in order to protect their young from predators and bad weather. The Babylonian Talmud explores other bird nesting locations and habits. Pigeons of a dovecot or pigeons of an attic. Actually, I think I'll stay on this screen. Who nested in wall crevices or in buildings, geese or chickens who nested in an orchard, one is obligated in sending. But those who nested inside the house, and likewise hard to say in pigeons, one is exempt from sending. So the legal principle here is that birds who reside more or less within the household, so birds one does not happen upon, which is the way the biblical verse formulates it. These are instead called by the Mishnah available. The Hebrew word is mezuman. These birds don't fall within the scope of the mother bird mitzvah. Should those birds nest freely in locations like a wall crevice, a nearby building, or an orchard, however, they become subject to the mother bird treatment according to this Talmudic teaching. So the Talmud mentions also nests on the air and in the sea. As Rav Yehuda said, Rav said, if one finds a nest in the sea, one is obligated in the mitzvah of sending, as it is stated. So said the Lord who makes a way in the sea. That's from Isaiah. If that is so, one found a nest in the sky about which it is written, the way of an eagle in the sky, that's Proverbs. One should also be obligated in sending away from the nest. The sky is called the way of an eagle, but it is not called a way in an unspecified manner. So let me explain. The Rabbi Rav here questions whether nests in the sea and sky fall within the scope of the mother bird mitzvah, given that Deuteronomy specifies that the nest is on a road, a tree, or the ground. The sea, but not the sky, concludes the Talmud, count as the road, the derech, mentioned in Deuteronomy 22:6, which is read here in conjunction with verses from Isaiah and Proverbs that use this same term, derech. So should one think these scenarios the product of rabbinic imagination? Goodfellow's book on avian architecture is instructive, and it is the source for these lovely photos. So some bird species, jacanas, marsh terns, grebes, rails, are specialist architects who build nests that either rest on a waterbed, float as islands, or roam as rafts. Nests in the air are even more impressive. Species, actually near where my parents live in New Jersey, there is an osprey nest. I think it's an osprey. Species like the osprey take years to build nests up on platforms, and they repair them when needed. The white stork builds nests on chimneys and utility poles. Some weavers and orioles build their nests dangling as if by magic in the air. Careful binding, weaving, and knotting provide the support for these pensile nests. The Talmud considers also the materials that birds use to pad the nest. The Talmud, so this is from Hullin 104b, Rabbi Yeremiah poses a question. A rag, what is the law? Does it interpose? Feathers, what is the law? Do they interpose? So let me explain. The mother must be sitting over the chicks, or on the eggs, according to the Deuteronomy verse. But what if there is something in between? Asks Rabbi Yeremiah. Does the command still apply? It's a technical point, but the question of interposition motivates Rabbi Yeremiah to consider the means by which birds build their nests. When read avian-centrically, the text shed light on the rich and diverse nesting habits of birds, located in pits, ditches, cisterns, caves, gardens, residential interiors, and hospitable spots in walls, corners, and crevices made up of found objects like rags and their own feathers. The nests that appear in Hullin testify to the ingenuity, agility, and versatility of their builders. So moving on, the mother bird plays the starring role in Deuteronomy 22, 6-7. The mother sitting over the chicks, don't take the mother, send off the mother. But what about the father? He doesn't make even a cameo appearance in Deuteronomy. Yet, in the lived reality of bird families, the father is far from an absent figure. One of the distinguishing features of birds is their biparental care norm. In 90 to 95% of bird species, both parents are involved in direct care of the young. Male and female birds are equally able to build a nest and incubate and feed chicks. And if bird fathers don't help out, the chicks have a diminished chance of survival. In some bird species, kiwis, cassowaries, moorhens, males are the exclusive or dominant caretaker. Rabbinic texts do ask about the father's role. Mishnah Hullin 12:2 features a dispute about whether the male korat, which according to Yehuda Felix is to be identified with the sand partridge, whether this korat is subject to the command of sending off the mother bird. So a male korat, Rabbi Eliezer obligates, while the sages exempt. In other words, what happens when the quote unquote mother bird of Deuteronomy is actually a father? Then the mitzvah no longer applies, say the sages. But Rabbi Eliezer dissents, saying the male partridge qualifies. The Mishnah elsewhere implies, however, that the mother bird is the primary, if not solo, caretaker. So just as eggs need their mother, so too do fledglings need their mother. Excluded are young birds who have already fledged. This Mishnah rules that when the nest contains young birds who are already able to fly, the mother bird commandment ceases to apply. So even though scientific data suggests that bird survival is generally dependent upon both parents, the Mishnah's representation of bird parenthood privileges the mother and invisibilizes the father. And you can see the same rhetoric of maternal dependency is used by Mishnah Sukkah with respect to humans. The male partridge doesn't fade into the background as other bird fathers do, however. The Talmud wonders at his persistence, and I'll just return to that slide. Rabbi Abahu said, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer? So a verbal analogy between brooding and brooding. It is written here as the kored that broods over young that he has not brought forth, and it is written there and hatch and brood under her shadow. The shared use of the verb for incubation, degirah, in Jeremiah and Isaiah is said to be the inspiration for Rabbi Eliezer's inclusion of the male partridge in the mitzvah. The male koreh is an exception even for Rabbi Eliezer, according to the Tosefta and Babylonian Talmud. All the other male birds explicitly fall outside the scope of the mitzvah, according to the Tosefta and Talmud. A male, one is exempt from sending, but with a male koreh, Rabbi Eliezer obligates, while the sage is exempt. Even though the male bird may incubate the eggs, feed the chicks, protect them, he doesn't satisfy the requirements of the commandment, according to the Tosefta and Talmud. The Mishnah, whatever may be its reasons, keeps the father status a little more ambiguous, mentioning only the male partridge and presenting him as the subject of dispute. Still, the father bird is not so easily booted out of the nest, even within the Talmud. Actually, I don't have this on the slide. Still, so this is Hullin 140b. A male on top of the eggs and a female bird, it's here. A female bird on top of the male. What is the law? Teku, the dilemma shall stand. So this passage once again poses the problem of interposition that we saw earlier with rags and feathers. In this scenario, it's the father bird who interposes, himself lying on top of the eggs, forming a barrier between the mother and her chicks. The question of whether the mitzvah still applies is left open, as is the question of the father bird somewhat precarious status within the bird family. But I think the image is suggestive. The nest is not a place of splendid isolation of mother with chicks, but is populated by a variety of other characters. And it's to some of these other characters that I turn next. So, like many social species, birds are cooperative or communal breeders with various what they call aunties and uncles who help out with childcare. This phenomenon of cooperative breeding, referring to when 3 or more individuals collectively raise a single brood or litter, has been recognized by naturalists for over 2 centuries. But with the rise of behavioral ecology in the 1960s, scientists became more curious about the evolutionary benefit of cooperative formations. Helpers at the nest, as naturalist Alexander Skutch called them, posed a paradox to evolutionary theory because of the apparent self-sacrifice or altruism that they seemed to show. In the less common but related phenomenon of brood parasitism, the helper at the nest is the mother bird herself, who's incubating and raising the egg of another species, another mother. Cuckoos and cowbirds are well known for dropping their eggs off in other birds' nests. Sometimes a mother bird raises an egg from a bird of the same species whose own biological mother has dropped it off there. So in addition to creative nest design and active paternal care, cooperative breeding and brood parasitism are features of bird life that rabbinic texts address. Rabbinic discussions refer repeatedly to nests in which the eggs are not the biological offspring of the parent sitting on top. Mishnah Hullin 12:2 is a case in point. In an impure bird, one is exempt from sending. An impure bird lies on the eggs of a pure bird. A pure lies on the eggs of an impure bird. One is exempt from sending. So here, the Mishnah exempts the nest in which a mother bird sits atop eggs born from the mother of a different bird species when one species is pure and the other impure. And it's assumed that if mother and child are both of impure species, the nest is unambiguously exempt. The Talmud further probes the scope of difference between quote unquote mother and child. So Rabbi Zera asks, a pigeon is upon the eggs of a tasil, what is the law? A tasil on the eggs of a pigeon, what is the law? What if the mother bird and the eggs upon which she sits are both of pure species, asked Rabbi Zera? Here, the pigeon and tasil. It's not totally clear what species tasil is. That's why I kept it in the Hebrew. But still, the mother bird and the eggs are not of the same species. Is the relationship between caretaker and child close enough to trigger the mother bird requirement? Abaye says yes, drawing an inference from the Mishnah. Abaye said, come in here. An impure bird lies on the eggs of a pure bird. A pure lies on the eggs of an impure bird. One is exempt from sending. Behold, a pure on a pure, that's Abaye. One is obligated. So Abaye highlights the Mishnah's concern with purity and impurity. Beyond that distinction, Abaye says, mother, quote unquote, mother and eggs should be taken as a package deal. So long as they're both from a pure species, they should be considered a pair for the purposes of the commandment. So these texts are asking what it means for a mother and child to count as such. The texts surprisingly take for granted that an adult and child of the same species, when found together in the nest, count as mother and child, when in reality they may not actually be biologically related, as is the case with a helper auntie, perhaps, or an uncle. Perhaps the rabbis knew less about cooperative breeding than we do, or maybe they figured a passerby couldn't be expected to tell if birds of the same species are biologically related. But even so, the Talmud takes as its premise that nests might be occupied by any number of unrelated individuals. The nest, as the rabbis understand it, is, you could say, a queer space, one in which mothers need not be breeders, families need not be made of kin relations. Queer bird families are a pretty unremarkable feature of the rabbinic text. Okay, so cooperative breeding requires birds to abide by pretty complex behavioral codes that we in the human world might call morality. A good indicator of the presence of a moral code is when individuals feel pressure to hide their violations. We can think, of course, of a lot of examples of this in the human world, but scientists have found examples among other species as well. Australian ornithologists Michael Double and Andrew Cockburn have documented female superb fairy wrens flying off in secret in the early morning to engage in quick sexual liaisons. In another case from Australia, white-winged choughs helped to find their compatriots, helped to feed their compatriots' chicks, but as soon as those compatriots weren't looking, they snatched the food back and gulped it down themselves. So Sarah Blaffer Hardy says these birds pay to stay, and occasionally they only pretend to pay at that. So a moral universe in which birds sometimes play by the rules, sometimes flout them, whether brazenly or on the down low, appears also in rabbinic texts. The flouting is explicit in rabbinic texts that actually use the rhetoric of rebellion from the Hebrew roots mem resh daled to describe birds who leave human domestic spaces. So note Tosefta Hullin 10:9. Geese, chickens, and doves who rebelled or made a nest in an orchard, one is obligated in sending. So the rebellion rhetoric, which I find striking, points to a world of assumptions. Birds are properly controlled by human beings. When they leave human domiciles, they quote unquote revolt against the natural hierarchy or against the human system. So bird rebellion might even reach the level of homicide, as we see in this Talmudic text. Ravina said, therefore, a pure bird who killed a person, one is exempt from sending. What's the reason? As the verse states, you shall send the mother. It refers to one whom you are commanded to send. which excludes this one whom you are not commanded to send, but to bring him to court. The Talmud here presents a case where a bird has murdered a human being. That bird need not be shooed away, says the Rabbi Ravina, since other consequences await the bird, that is to say, judicial trial. So the Talmud scenario, I hope you're already starting to think about this, it raises a lot of questions. Does Deuteronomy 22:7 really intend to exclude the very unusual case of a homicidal bird who needs to be tried by the court? Even the staunchest of Talmudists is likely to admit that the verse did not have homicidal birds in mind. Then there's also the matter of bird trials. Much scholarship has been devoted to the fascinating phenomenon of judicial trials for animals. The question that interested me most, I confess, when I first read this text, is how a bird could kill a person in the first place. I researched this a tiny bit. There are recorded instances of birds killing people. Cassowaries actually have a reputation for it, as do ostriches, I guess, large birds, but it's rare and tends to be in response to provocation, as you'd imagine. So in a tragic comic Talmudic tale to which I now turn, a bird rebel acts like a human rebel and is punished as one in this strange story. It's inspired by a wordplay on a pigeon breed that appears in the Mishnah. It's called the Hardisean dove. The later rabbi didn't really know what this species was, and one interpretation was that it was a reference to King Herod. So here's the story. According to the one who teaches Yonei Hardesiot, it's on account of King Herod, Rav Kahana said, I myself saw them, and they were standing in 16 rows, each a meal wide, and they were calling out, my master, my master. There was one of them who was not calling out, my master, my master. Her companion said to her, blind one, say, my master, my master. She said to her, blind one, say, my master, my slave. They brought her and slaughtered her. Rav Ashi said, Rabbi Hanina said to me, it is mere words. Can it enter your minds that it is mere words? Rather say through words. So, okay, I understand this is a very strange story. And it helps to know it's actually a riff on another story that's told about Herod in Babylonian Talmud, Baba Batra 3b to 4a, where Herod's pedigree is called into question and his claims to authority are undermined, and he is introduced as a slave of the Hasmonean house. So in this story in Hullin, it's a bird who proclaims Herod's illegitimate roots. The bird pays a bloody price for it. Ultimately, the story ponders the meaning of language. Is this just a silly tale? Is it mere words? Or is this, on the contrary, the account of a lone bird who speaks truth to power? Rather say through words. That's how Rashi understands this last line. So the story speaks to the moral calculus through which Mishnah and Babylonian Talmud Hullin frame the mother bird commandment. Here, it is not a pedagogy of compassion, but of power and of pain. Birds rebel and kill and are killed, just as people do. Birds are not vectors of morality, but agents within it, as murderers, traitors, heroes, or martyrs. This is how Jason Reball urges us to view animals who resist or escape captivity. These animals understand that there will be consequences for incorrect actions if they refuse to perform, if they attack a trainer, or if they escape their cage. They know that they will be beaten, have their food rations reduced, and be placed in solitary confinement. Captive animals know all of this, and yet they still carry out such actions, often with a profound sense of determination. This is why these behaviors can be understood as a true form of resistance. So I now come to a close. You've probably been waiting for birds as hats. Here they come. So rabbinic texts feature birds, as you've seen, who are builders, dads, helpers, killers, rebels. So this last text, to which I now turn, features birds in yet another role as hats. The Papunian said to Rav Matana, one found a nest on the head of a person, and I couldn't believe that on Google Images, I actually found this image. What is the law? He said, and to earth upon his head, 2 Samuel. People from the village of Papunya posed to Rav Matana a question. Does the mother bird commandment still apply if the nest is located on top of someone's head? Does the nest still qualify as being on the road, as Deuteronomy specifies? Like the passage on homicidal birds, this one inspires a host of questions. At least it did for me. Why would a person allow a bird to build a nest on their head? How would the nest stay on? The Talmud's answer to the question is terse, citing without explanation a snippet of 2 Samuel 15:32, and to earth upon his head, which describes the mourning of King David's ally during Absalom's rebellion. According to medieval Talmud commentator Rashi's explanation, the fact that the dust on the head in this verse is called ground, that's the word used, suggests that a human head, however far off the actual ground it may be, qualifies to as ground. The answer then is yes. The mother bird mitzvah applies even when the nest is on top of someone's head. In the continuation of the Talmud, the Papunians pose a series of outlandish questions to Rav Matana, asking him to identify foreshadowings of biblical characters before they appear in the narrative. They ask about Moses and Haman and Esther and Mordecai. The dialogue's fantastical tone suggests that the head bird nest is intended possibly in a similar spirit. Nevertheless, a serious insight, I think, lies therein regarding the entanglement of human and animal lives in the image of the nest as hats. The human head becomes the ground, the foundation that facilitates animal families and homes, serving animal needs rather than the other way around. When the chicks hatch, the human head is left behind, its purpose served, or alternatively, the human and bird retain the relationship that the conjoining of their lives created. So Matthew Calarco's concept of indistinction is helpful for visualizing the head bird nest scenario, as well as other ones that the Talmud features. The Talmud's head bird nest displaces anthropocentric ways of being, opening up affirmative possibilities for other ways of life. So too, do the appreciation of avian architecture that the Talmud expresses, its interest in the gender dynamics of the nest, in its queer bird families, and in the sometimes violent revolt of freedom-seeking birds. The very notion of the mother bird subverts human and animal dualism by imagining a motherhood that transcends species. We need new ideas, says Calarco, new practices that resist the status quo, but also that allow for other forms of life and relation to emerge. Mishnah and Bavli, Hullin 12 offer new ideas, I've tried to show, that go beyond the good luck and compassion usually associated with the mother bird mitzvah. The Talmudic texts I've discussed suggest a reality that Calarco calls indistinction, a zone of profound identity and shared exposed embodiment among human and animal. And no image, I think, better captures this zone of identity and shared embodiment than the Talmud's nest head. That's not to deny the anthropocentrism of the mother bird mitzvah, which presupposes human exceptionalism a binary human-animal ontology, a strong moral hierarchy, which are the three defining features of anthropocentrism, according to Calarco. The mitzvah presumes that baby birds are just there for the taking, that our obligation to the bird family extends no further than this brief act of deception, that human families occupy a moral space that's different from and superior to that of bird families. The anthropocentrism of this mitzvah is, as Calarco says of anthropocentrism generally, more than a conceptual apparatus. It is a robust, interlocking, complex series of discursive and material practices. But, and I now close, if we humans are so vain that we probably think this mitzvah is about us, that's only partly true for the rabbis. As the rabbis delve into this mitzvah, they're led to dwell at some length on the lives of birds and to give those lives thick description. Emerging from the literature I've discussed with you today is a rich and complex engagement with another species. The mother bird mitzvah has the salutary effect of shaking the rabbis and to us out of our ingrained anthropocentrism and pushing us towards what I think in fact comes naturally as the taking, the killing, the consuming of animals that lies at the heart of much of Jewish life. What I'm referring to is instead an affinity for other animals and a curiosity about them. The mitzvah gets us out of our own heads, or as is the case with the head bird nest, gets us to use our heads in new ways. So from the Mishnah's partridge dad, to the Talmud's nest head, to Maimonides' rationale of compassion, to Yoni's mother's porch, the mother bird mitzvah is like the mother bird herself on the move. The mother bird mitzvah inspires legal and exegetical elaboration, moral and theological reflection, fantastical stories and popular practices, and not least of all, appreciation for all that birds can do. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. It's very, very interesting. I'm still thinking and mulling over the rebellious birds who go from being domesticated to becoming wild in a sense, and the use of marad for their behavior. In any case, do we have questions, comments, reactions from people?
Thank you for such an interesting and fascinating talk. And I want to ask the question because Saul already kind of mentioned it. So in the Tosefta Hullin, right, it's geese, chickens, and doves who rebel. And are these classed because are they classed because they're domestic birds? And are only domestic birds capable of rebelling? Or are all the birds capable of rebelling, or does it change because I think later in the Talmud, it seems like all the birds are capable of rebelling. So I was just kind of curious what if that shifts at all from the Tosefta to the Talmud.
Yeah, interesting question. Yeah, I think your answer to the question makes sense to me, that those birds are specified because those are the ones typically that kind of occupy the households. Probably an entirely kept way. Like there's probably, I mean, I don't know if anybody here has birds. It seems hard to keep birds if you're not caging them at least all the time. And it's a good question what the caging practices would have been. But I think that sounds right, that these would have been the birds that people kept. It's clear, I know that's, yeah, and actually I'm thinking about other texts I've looked at that do speak. I mean, you have the general references to like oath, to fowl, and so that would be presumably geese and chickens, and then there's a fair amount of discussion of pigeons. It seemed pretty clear people kept pigeons. So I think the reference is to the birds that would have lived with humans and then been considered exempt from the command, and then they become subject to the command upon leaving the human space.
I was going to ask to hear a little bit more about the pure and impure mixing of birds, which I believe is in Hullin 12, Mishnah, Hullin 12:2. And if I remember correctly, the text talked about how mixing a pure and impure exempts from sending off. Are there other comments that you didn't share about this, or it's just flatly stated that, if you have this kind of mixing of a mother of either pure or impure type and eggs of either pure or impure type that are mixed, that just exempts? Is there anything more said about that? Or do you have any more thoughts about that? I'm always interested in mixing in my own, so that struck me.
Yeah, I'll just say I don't know how much this illuminates the question of mixing, but it's stated very flatly at the beginning of that Mishnah that the impure bird, if that's how we want to translate tameh, is outside the scope of the commandment, which does raise questions. Why should that be the case? Does that just have to do with eating and issues of consumption? Is there more to it? But that's kind of a ground rule for the Mishnah, that impure birds are not part of this. So then that's why mixing becomes an issue. And it does seem to be the case that once you have an impure bird as part of the equation, then it kind of throws off the mitzvah, and it kind of diffuses it, makes it not apply. One of the intriguing and frustrating things about the Mishnah is how little explanation it gives of its legislations, and so it makes it interesting to speculate. I think that I'm just looking at a little commentary now. I think in midrashic texts they do base this exemption exegetically. I'm not sure how much that adds to our understanding, but the exemption of impure birds, I think, gets rooted in scripture, whereas for the Mishnah, it's just kind of the starting point.
Question as an outsider to the field, if that's okay.
Of course.
Thank you very much for this paper, which was absolutely fascinating. And of course, the images you used were really magnificent. I realized that my field is early Christianity and Greek and Syriac traditions in particular. And I realized that most often we characterize Mishnaic material or Talmud as quite separate from these other literatures. But I've been looking recently at Greek and Syriac texts on the hexameron, on the 6 days of creation. And we have a number of, for example, Greek authors who do very detailed intersection with Greek philosophical texts that look at animals with respect to moral instruction, using animal behavior to, you referenced this a lot. This is exactly not what your texts were doing, which was very striking. But there are other texts which do, other early Christian texts, which do marvel at the complexity and diversity, say, of bird species and animal species, without without that anthropocentric, it becomes more theocentric, like look at the remarkable variety that God made and the variety of sound, and birds don't even need teachers to know how to fly or to know how to sing, and yet there's all this diversity. So I think it's very interesting where in what contexts non-human life is affirmed as being not human. And then in what context it's sort of brought into the, made to be like. But I did wonder whether there's any indication of interaction with, it's such a deep philosophical tradition, the Greek texts about animals. And I just wondered if there's other, maybe it's an unfair question, or whether this really is a place that's just without intersection at all with that kind of tradition.
I've been asking myself that question quite a bit. And what I started to do over the summer till the semester and the school year got made it harder to do lots of reading is look at the Roman agricultural manuals.
Oh,
and because the texts that are more sort of like moralizing texts are interesting, but it wasn't quite what I was looking for. And I really am interested in ancient texts that really engage with the animals in some kind of detailed, real way. I think I'm looking. I'm looking for something that's a little less anthropocentric and a little more engaged in animal life. And then specifically, I'm interested in this question of kinship among animals, because I do think that that kinship is a particularly powerful place of connection. I think when people encounter animals in a kind of kinship mode or caretaking mode, I think that we do have this capacity to recognize that and kind of develop an affective connection to seeing that kind of relationship. So it feels like a particularly rich area, which is what attracted me to these laws in the Torah. And I have loved the Roman agricultural manuals because, first of all, the materials are just really, really interesting. They feel really close to life. And they talk a lot about, the real lives of animals, although it's kind of a mix of different things. And they show a lot of interest in kinship and kind of how animals interact with each other, the social lives of the animals. Yeah. There is this question that's become really central in animal studies is having to do with, do animals have culture? Do they teach each other? Which is kind of connected to questions of kinship, because a lot of times education and culture, the framework for that can, start out as family. And there's a lot of interest in those manuals. So I'm finding that to be a rich starting place for other literatures. I'm curious to explore other possibilities. I'm expecting something interesting to come out of those manuals. They're not in any directly connected way, but I'll have to see. I don't know if maybe in legal materials I'll find something of interest. I mean, one of the challenges for me in what I just shared with you is legal materials can be hard to kind of read for other things. They can be hard to read like if you have kind of cultural interests. You can get sucked into this technical discourse and this very neutralizing discourse. And I think one of the things I'm trying to do is read against the grain a little bit to try to understand these legal texts as giving us some insight into culture, into rabbinic concerns. It's a hard thing to do methodologically. So I imagine that would be the case just as much, if not more so, for if I say I'm looking, sifting through, various Roman legal collections. I have a feeling it's going to be hard to pull out things that'll be of interest for me, but it is something I want to do.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, once again, thank you so much, Beth. It was very, very interesting and a pleasure. And for those who don't know, we'll reconvene again at noon tomorrow, and then I believe at 4 o'clock for the third presentation. But until then, have a good evening. And again, Beth, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. I
Pleasure.
really enjoyed.